testing where you try and find the limitations of something. And specifically, the thing we're trying to find the limitations of is the dungeon generation in Valheim. So if you give me a moment here, I will show you. Basically, there's a mod called Expand World Dungeons that you can put on your Valheim server, fully vanilla friendly, clients don't need it. And basically, you can adjust the amount of minimum and maximum rooms for the dungeon generation, and also the minimum required rooms, which are like the special areas, if that makes sense. So, what I noticed is that in Path of Magic, well, let's just put it this way. I tripled the dungeons, and I assumed that was going to cause problems. But it didn't. At least I've been doing a lot of a specific dungeon and haven't encountered almost any problems with the dungeon being too big, if that makes sense, and it like bleeding into another area or that issue. So I'm looking into that, and well, what better way than to triple it again? So that's why these numbers were 240. They're originally a lot smaller than that, but I've tripled them twice. So now we're gonna see how that looks, because we can just reset the dungeons using a pile of coins. This is another mechanic on Path of Magic. Any of the dungeons that are like force reset, like the infested mines, the burial chambers, the sunken crypts, also goblin camps. These places you can actually reset yourself if you just have 999 coins. Oh, but it actually looks like there must have been a reset already. So I don't need to do that, but I will need it afterwards. So I'm just going to put them in here real quick. And I'll also be playtesting more of the tower shield nonsense, right? So one of the reasons that things work this way on Path of Magic is that the idea is to allow players to have a highly defensive mode. So pretty much, as long as there's no crazy powerful mob in the mix, just by holding block, you'll stay alive because of the bubble blocking system. And this is one of the ways that we try and make melee more viable compared to the, you know, power of ranged and magic. They're very, very strong at the end of the game, whereas melee becomes very, very weak. So I'll be working on all of this. And that's what you're seeing happening. Like, there's two buffs happening right now. One is from the tower shield. Anytime you block with a tower shield in Path of Magic, you'll get increased carry weight, right? And then additionally, because of the heavy armor set here, you get the increased movement speed. Or sorry, no, it's from the tower shield. The heavy armor set gives you the increased carry weight, and the tower shield gives you the increased movement speed. So you can then put the tower shield away, and then it is practically, you know, like more useful, right? Because you can increase, you can use a you can use a tower shield to get that buff, and then that buff will allow you to be more powerful, right? And that's also something I'm trying to playtest more. It's just melee in general, because I find myself to not use melee, in all honesty. That sort of changed when I got the knife in previous playthroughs, and then I started having more fun with melee. I'm trying to remember. I would make heavy armor sets, like when I first played Valheim. Apologies, it's like 3 a.m. and I haven't, or 4 a.m. for me. I haven't woken up fully yet. But when I first started playing Valheim, I would use the heavy armor sets. Hey, When did I get silver? That's awesome. I did a whole dungeon earlier to try and get silver, and I got 1. And I just randomly walked to the trader and got 2 silver. Oh, that's hilarious. All right. But I was trying to talk about how I've played through Valheim a couple times normally. Not until Fader. I had played through Valheim like 4 or 5 times, and then the Mistlands kind of came out, and then I only played through it I think once after that, like fully. And since then I haven't tried to like play to the end, if that makes sense. I've just been so entertained by whatever is happening on the server or what people are doing that I don't feel like it's necessary. And that's one of the reasons I love Valheim so much, because it allows you to like form a community with other people, and like you can build this world that is more of like what you want, basically. And it's really cool seeing how other people do it, and everyone benefits from like the server being active. And it doesn't have to be super active. Like, people think there needs to be loads of people on the server, and like I get the impression that as long as like when people log on, they either see stuff in the world is different, because if they see that, it might not matter if they're the only person online, because sometimes there's like different time zones, and that ends up happening, right? So I finally caved and bought the belt. But I don't think it's as important necessarily that there's always a lot of people online. What matters at the end of the day is that players, 1, have ways to communicate with each other, and 2, that they see impacts of other players' activity in the world. Because if someone logs in and they're playing in an area by themselves and there's only 1 person online or something, then yeah, that probably is gonna mess with their immersion. But if they log on and they're in an area other people are interacting with, and things are built a bit differently, maybe there's more supplies, this seems to work really well. It seems to be an immersive experience for people. So I don't think it's as important to like keep a bunch of people on the server. And this server, like, there's also this weird thing with Valheim where people feel like there has to only be 10 slots, because as if all 10 people are going to be online all of the time constantly. like it's hilarious too, because people, even when they're really into Valheim, maybe they play like 6 hours a day, right? That's probably exaggerating, but even then there's 24 hours in a day, and a server runs all 24 hours, so that means you have 4 slots. So realistically, even if people have 6-hour sessions, there's technically enough room for, you know, for 4 full-time people. That would mean 40 in total. Ah, I see. This didn't reset. My cart's still here, so the monsters outside just spawned. An interesting, let's call it accidental mechanic on Palm, is that power shields can actually stagger enemies. It's not actually the tower shields doing it though, it's the bubble block system. But because of the way tower shields work, they don't trigger staggers, right? And that makes them kind of feel less damaging than other, you know, bucklers. But when your bubble breaks, as long as you were blocking, you get a new bubble, and it like knocks back the enemies, right? And staggers them. So you can use that to your advantage. And that was also not purposeful. A lot of these features, like, they may seem like, why did that happen? But it really wasn't intended. There's just like, I would try and do one thing, and then that would accidentally cause like 5 other things to happen. And oftentimes those things were more interesting than the thing I was actually trying to do. So I would just roll with it. And with EWP development in particular, that seems to work really well. You sort of just change things and don't be afraid to. and then see what happens. And then do things based on what you can do in EWP by seeing what happens. That process just generally seems to work. And I find it really enjoyable as well, in all honesty. I guess that's not surprising though. So I need some money in order to reset this dungeon. So I'm gonna sell these full stacks of things to our friendly little blacksmith here. On Path of Magic, you can sell things to anybody who is a diverger. But certain diverger have... they have, like, let's call it special traits. So the special diverger are the fishmonger, who has a quest to get a invincible fishing raft, and also allows you to sell fish. And the fish are priced pretty high at the moment. The idea is to like make it actually incentivizing, if that makes sense. Because it's not like, how do I put this? I'm not so much trying to make some kind of economy with the coins and the prices in Path of Magic. It's more that I want to make it fun to get coins and to spend them. Because I believe that if coins in Valheim are very useful, like genuinely feel useful to the player, and the player finds themselves spending them and spending them and spending them, I think that that is a good way to make Valheim more Valheim, because Valheim already has a lot of coin sources, but the problem is they sort of stop working as an incentive to the player, so it stops mattering, right? And it makes the areas not feel as rewarding. At least I don't know. That's how it was for me. Like by the time I got to the Charred Fortresses, I didn't care about the money I could get from the Charred Fortresses, if that makes sense. And I think that's a shared feeling for not all people, but many. So there's many sinks on Path of Magic. Like you summon traders with 999 coins, and you also reset dungeons. So you can build a pile of coins, which conveniently does not need a workbench. Awesome little feature of coins, and then reset the whole dungeon. And now bear with me here, because I'm actually, I upped all those values earlier, right? So maybe this dungeon is just a small one, but even the minimum amount is now triple what the original maximum is, because it's 3 times 3. So we'll see how the interior of this place is. And there's also a couple other things I want to playtest. Like, for example, on Palm, I have to make it very clear that dungeons are like really dangerous, so that players don't get misled, you know what I mean? I know they can learn the hard way, but I find that it's not good to just teach people by killing them. You need to basically tell them, hey, this is gonna kill you, and then they do it and die, and then they're like, ah, yeah, that was true, I should have listened. You shouldn't just force people into the mechanic, and like, I know that happens a lot. I'm not saying I have applied this everywhere, but in general, like, when I started making the features on Palm, I was just experimenting more with EWP and getting used to it. Whereas now I'm much more familiar. So I feel more comfortable making things, organizing them, sharing them with others, etc. And I find it easier to develop now than it was before. So it's been, in one way, more enjoyable, if that makes sense. What's up with this guy? I'm just gonna let him be. So we've respawned our crypt, and I've got a system down. I've been practicing this. So there's so much loot and building materials, and you're gonna see why. The idea is to make the crypts a source of building materials, like a reliable source. I'm trying to make dungeons not just deeper, because who cares if they're deeper if they're not like rewarding, right? But the player needs to be equally sort of rewarded by building materials and stuff as the dungeon is deep, if that makes any sense. So we're gonna do this with that mentality in mind. And I also might encounter some kind of issue here. This is normal. The noises are normal. We actually want more of this stuff because I gotta warn players, right? I gotta be like, oh, this is different. So there is this auditory cue, and that actually signals that there's spawnings, but I don't think people are gonna realize that. They're just gonna associate it with like the freaky dungeons. And that might work well, because when you enter, you immediately hear a lot of chaos, right? And it's disconcerting. But I feel like it's not visual enough. There needs to be some visual indicator. So when some poor player wanders their way into one of these places and they don't know that they have another chance, you know what I mean? I just don't know how could one do that. I can imagine how, okay, if I could just spawn stuff, right? I could just place like a skull or a warning here. So one of the other players, teens, had an idea that when the player enters the dungeon, they get one of those messages on the screen. So I think I'm gonna go with something like that, where the problem is like when a player enters a dungeon, there's not a clear trigger. So they go down into the dungeon and then they press enter or they enter, which is complicated when you try and script for it. And then when they go down here, they're just moving. They don't necessarily need to interact. So at this point, I haven't done anything that would allow the server to notice me unless I use like pokers, and I try and avoid that kind of stuff just because I don't. At some point, I want to have Palm and test like if there's like 15 people in different places on a server, like how does EWP function with that and these things. So I'm very hesitant to work with player pokers because in the long run, I'm not sure how I can make it be viable. But for now, I think probably I'll do like, ooh, I'll probably do the first interaction. Like right there, I would have triggered it. So the first time the player does something, it like says a message. It says like, this player is dungeoning in a name of the dungeon. And then everyone else knows like, okay, they're doing that. There's already a notifier system. So that allows people to look at the Discord and see what other people are doing, which helps with transparency. And it also helps people with that feeling of other people are on the world. Because when people play normal Valheim, they don't know necessarily what's happening elsewhere. You know what I'm saying? Like they log on, and if the person isn't on, and they're like, they may see them speaking in Discord, which will help, but it's not quite the same, right? As seeing, this person is building here, this person is doing this person died there, like that log, I think, I'm not sure, but I think that it helps with that immersive process. Hey, a Crypt Explorer. Okay, this is awesome. She's at, she's at half health. Oh, I missed the block. I'm a fool. Hey, I got it that time, okay. In theory, I can just keep blocking. And this Crypt Explorer is gonna come over here and save the day. Right? Right? You see what I mean, though, about the the Wraith, please. I forgot about that. Yeah, bronze armor has a chance to terrify certain monsters. So wraiths, and I think abominations, and one other one, maybe trolls. I don't remember. I've really done like maybe too many things to try and make the bronze armor more viable. But the fear effects only get triggered when you block. So maybe it's not common enough at the moment. I'm not sure. But I want to take advantage of the fact that we got a friendly spawn here. And this is the first Diverger. And these Diverger like stamina food. So if I give some stamina food, it should heal her. Yeah, there we go. And so now that's going to be useful. Seems to be some kind of spawner over here. So maybe it's time for some silver arrow action. I think so. Wraiths are awesome enemies. I must say. They have, oh, I don't know why they didn't see me, but I'm just gonna take advantage of that. Ah, because they're all aggroing her. That is interesting. I've noticed that a couple times with the Diverger. Because on Path of Magic, there's there's a lot of different Diverger that you use, right? The idea is to bring the Diverger into player interaction more frequently, so that the Diverger that already exist in the world get more practicality or practical uses, and also the player gets more mechanics. I find that the Diverger are already really interesting. Irongate has done a really good job of like making a really cool world. It's sort of like the server and EWP allow us to animate their world. That's the way I look at it. So they've provided all of these mechanisms, essentially. And by doing server-side EWP modifications, hey, we got some silver. Awesome. We become able to actually adjust the experience, right? And that's what I view it as, animating the experience. Oof. Brutal. Hey, she's helping out. Lots of tin. That's awesome. So, accidentally, so many accidents. Tin has become a very scarce resource in Path of Magic. I don't know what happened, but at some point, I managed to delete all of the tin in the overworld, which had this interesting side effect of making a tin scarcity. And instead of fixing it, I just leaned into it and made it so that the dungeons themselves are where you get tin. So you can go into troll caves or sunken crypts, I think, or these burial chambers. And I'll explain how the spawning on Path of Magic works. The server pretty much reacts to what normally happens. So to the player, it's very, I would assume, confusing, because things things just show up en masse, right? That was a hilarious outcome, by the way. But basically what's happening is it's a normal bone pile spawner, which is spawning a specific enemy. But then the server adds layers to that. And essentially the server reacts. Every time an enemy spawns, there's a chance a random amount of time later that another enemy will show up. And it's a very frequent chance. It's like 70% of the time. So that's why there's this lingering spawning effect. That's probably a good way to imagine it. Lingering spawning. The spawning doesn't just endlessly continue, at least at the moment. But you do have situations where you'll destroy a spawner, like a bone pile or something, and the enemies keep showing up. And also in other areas, like as you saw in the beginning of this stream, or, well, maybe you weren't watching that, but basically I thought that this crypt had... Yeah, 2-star Wraith? Oh, thank you for this room. I feel so grateful for this moment. Easiest 2-star... Yeah, okay, yeah, you see what's happening? So this is the mechanic, basically. And this might not make sense, like why have so many undead. But remember, the idea is to actually get building resources. Oh! To get building resources. Hey, I got him. That's good, because that Wraith was going to get empowered by me dying. So I'm glad that the silver killed him. But the idea is to get building resources out of the chambers. And the way it works by default is you have to sort of look for more chambers. But what I'm playtesting is this notion of building a base next to a specific dungeon you like, and dungeon crawling through that one dungeon over and over again, and having that be fun and a way to accumulate building materials. So that's what I've been doing pretty much. And what I've learned is that it's actually good to keep fighting this stuff in the hallways instead of trying to clear everything. But as you saw, it's not so easy to just clear everything on Palm. It's every time you kill things, they have a chance of coming back. So with the spawners in particular, every time you destroy a Grey Dwarf spawner or a bone pile, it's gonna go away at first. But then, anywhere from 30 seconds to 10 minutes later, it will return 50% of the time. So it doesn't happen every time, it's not guaranteed, but it does happen quite frequently. And I think if I remember right, it can re-trigger itself. But, hey, I love that. There's something about the little golden hearts that just makes it very endearing. But while these mechanics may be very intense, if you don't anticipate that they're there, or that you expect it to be normal, the idea is that it adds a challenging game world, adds a way for us to use more powerful mechanisms and it not end up getting absurd. That's sort of what happens with magic in base Valheim. It's so powerful that it does get a little, let's say, absurd, right? It becomes incredibly strong. Are we safe now? Nope. See, that was the short one, right? And eventually, it'll stop respawning. But even then, I'm not really sold on that, to be honest, because as you'll see, basically, we actually get building resources from killing enemies. So I've been wondering, this is weird actually, it's not supposed to respawn this frequently, but I have been wondering, like, what happens? What happens if the spawners don't actually get removed permanently? What if when you're in a dungeon, it stays a source of enemies? And like, you don't get the chests and everything else to respawn until it resets, but the enemies, the source of the building materials, keep coming, right? This is what I'm working on, like this notion, right? And that's why there's things like tin, you find copper nodes, and in small quantities you get silver from those ancient pots we saw earlier, and also from a variety of other situations. You can get drops. There's a whole drop table. And that's actually how these monsters and everything give us the loot. The game, or the server, sees that there's a ragdoll from a monster, and then it looks at the biome, and then it rolls a chance for one of the available options. And it doesn't happen every time. We actually toned the loot down a lot. It seems that with loot, it's kind of like the less frequent, the better, to a point. It depends what kind of loot. If it's building materials, that logic doesn't really work as well. In that case, it's more like variability of things is useful. Whereas with player rewards and incentives, it's a different situation. Ooh, 2-star. I gotta be careful. Hey, so you can use a weaker enemy to get a bubble, and then you don't have to worry as much about the strong enemy, because you can break your bubble blocking and then take out the stronger 2-star enemy. Whereas if it was just a lone 2-star enemy, I couldn't have done that because I wouldn't have been able to survive that first block. And essentially how it works is your total health is relevant, because as long as your total health in Palm is bigger than the highest hit that you could take by the monster you're fighting, then you will get a bubble if you block when you get attacked. If you don't block, it then is possible that you can have the bubble break, not get a new one, and die. And the idea is to make this association. It's very simple. You hold this, you survive. You let go, you die. You hold this, you survive. You let go, you die. I find that the base way that Valheim works functions well in, like, maybe small group combat. It works quite well. But then when you have groups of enemies, it's almost like the game needs different options to allow the melee player to have more tools. Or at least that's how I feel about it. That's why there's so many buffs to the melee on Path of Magic. You heal sometimes when an enemy dies within a couple meters of the player. All sorts of other things, like the bubble blocking system itself. These are all ways to try and make melee slowly almost as powerful as the other options. I think this might be... Was that the full dungeon? I don't remember if I explored... I think I did explore everything here, right? Oh, nope. Nope, definitely not. Alright. Ooh, nice. Awesome. These rooms are cool. These are, if you remember earlier, I was looking at the Expand World dungeon file, which is the thing you put on the server, basically. And then you can adjust things like the minimum amount of rooms or the maximum amount of rooms. And that's what we did. So the idea is to see, like, how big can you make the dungeons? Is there a practical limit? Because there's already this zone thing where like it's complicated if a dungeon clips into another dungeon. But at the same time, I'm kind of wondering, like, what if, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I want to see what happens if the dungeon generation just, like, I want to find where the ceiling is. Because in this notion of making dungeons as deep as possible, and I don't just mean that by, like, the dungeon itself. I also mean the feeling, adding depth to the experience. I want to lean into this notion. There's one other idea that the dungeons maybe could connect to each other somehow. It's kind of, we haven't figured out a way to procedurally do, well, I haven't figured out a way to procedurally do that, but there are instances on Path of Magic of this thing I'm explaining. The, how do I, oh yeah, the Diverger tunnels. There's these places you can find, I've shown them on the stream a couple times, that they take you somewhere else. So you may find a small meadow, and you go there, and it takes you to a large meadow. The thing is, you don't know where the large meadow is, it's off of the path, so like it's like a more blank place, but it's also more dangerous because of the no map experience, right? But in these actual dungeons, I think I can apply a similar mentality. But we'll see. Because I can manually place things, but it would be much better if they tie into the already existing procedural generation of the dungeons. So essentially, like, for example, imagine if this instead becomes some like magic gateway thing, and you just like, you know, you just do this, and then you go to another dungeon. You know, the problem though is that becomes very, if it's procedural, like, well, the dungeons respawn, right? So it probably couldn't be random. Ah, yeah, I was thinking it would have to be random, but what would work is if the dungeon, like when they have the thing, it goes to the nearest other dungeon of that type, because then it wouldn't matter as much if they respawned, because the distance of the location itself is still the same. I don't know, that's all theoretical though. We'll see. Hey, a lantern. Nice. Could use that actually. Let's see. Lantern and tower shield. I'm disarmed completely. All I can do is defend. It's pretty funny. The lanterns on Palm are actually buffed. I should make it so that they show that. Oh yeah, because they're drops. Oh, that's a good idea. Okay, 1 second. I'm not gonna do it, I'm just adding it to the implementation list. I find that the best ideas come from listening to other people or watching them play, and also playing yourself. And then you have these experiences, and then if you take notes based on those experiences, that process works much more effectively than if you just try and imagine using your mind. At least for me personally. So right now I'm adding to add the text. Basically, when you use a Diverger Lantern on Path of Magic, if a Death Skeeto gets near you and goes into its attack phase, it gets destroyed. And ticks as well. So you can use these to like make ticks die when they attack you. And it works much more effectively with the ticks because they start their attack away from you and try and jump on you, which gives the server more time to remove them. Whereas the Death Skeeto, if you're around a lot of people and that kind of thing, it's not as reliable. Like, the Death Skeeto is going to die after it attacks you, but it might have killed you after that, right? So it's not always perfect. But right now, there's no way the player knows that by just finding one of these lanterns. But because they're looted lanterns, the server has a chance to adjust them. So what I'm going to do is add text to server spawned Verger lanterns. There we go. It's very simple. And the text is like, it's the same trick as this one. You see how the Abyssal Razor, even though this is old vanilla, no mods or anything, well, I'm using quality of life mods, but the items themselves are fully vanilla. There's been nothing that has like adjusted this razor. It's using mechanisms already present in the game, using formats of data already present in the game, right? So we see that there's quality level 6, and it says status partially empowered. That's actually, it's like a trick. It looks like, oh, there's a crafted by field, a status, a crafted on. No, it's actually just the same as the crafted by field, but the text is offset to make it look like status is one of the fields for the weapon, but it doesn't actually work that way. And you can see that it says partially empowered in the green text, right? So that is what I'm talking about. I'm gonna make it so that the Verger Lantern says what it does if it is looted from Palm. So it won't work for the ones that the players build in their own inventory, but it will work for any of them that spawn outside of it. You see this nonsense? This is what I like. I love it when a dungeon, I've cleared the other ways, and it seems like, okay, well, that was it, you know? But then you find that one corner, and then, right, I'm used to these elevations leading to nothing. You know what I'm saying? But look at that. Boom. Goes down over there. I see spawner purple. That's danger. Dead hairs. Hey. Nice. These are actually, I think my favorite room in the vanilla dungeon generation for burial chambers. I think it's this one. It's this like big ol' shaft kind of thing, right? And the player finds it, and what's cool about it is it adds a lot. And I like seeing this room from my playing perspective, because I feel excited, because I know that this room has like many connecting points, so it's likely that it's going to lead to different places. It adds a lot of depth. It adds that experience, right? Because there's that one there, and then there's this part here, so it goes down that way, and it goes down over here, and then additionally the game will spawn these like items in these little nooks and crannies, so you can use those, and you can like make chances to replace them with other stuff. It's a really cool room. I find it to be very, very useful. And also exciting from the player's perspective. Because it's not too brash. I like how Iron Gate has the gates, to be honest. It adds more suspense, and also allows the player to sort of control the dungeon experience a bit. So I've considered like maybe it would be better for the player if the door rate was increased, because that's another thing we can adjust. Because the doors give so much practicality to the player, right? There's been situations where I'm running away from something that is going to kill me, but I'm able to like get into an area and shut a door, and then that buys me enough time to like recover my health or do whatever, and then I'm able to actually survive. We'll see though. I'm hoping we find some kind of limit with these dungeons. Like, if they get too big, they like clip into nothing or whatever. The good news is that Palm already runs this like dungeon layer destroyer, so there could be a problem that they avoided that we don't have to worry about. Essentially, when the dungeons... Okay, on Palm, it wouldn't matter as much if the dungeons get so big they clip into each other. And I have a feeling there might be a way to do that in a way where sometimes it makes the dungeons connect. Most of the time, it wouldn't happen. But I have a feeling that we could, just by tweaking that, maybe make it so it's possible for a magical occurrence to happen in a couple places on the server where things get linked. And I would just need to learn how that works and then add the dungeons that sort of distance away from each other, you know what I'm saying? We'll see though, we'll see. For now, I'm just gonna keep playtesting this crypt here. It's quite large. In these areas, these things you see here, these are what are referred to as the required rooms. That was the thing that you saw earlier. Hey, Ash, welcome, welcome. Ash says no, it's another location with its own dungeon generation. I don't remember what I said about that. I probably misspoke. Maybe you can reword it so I understand. I really like this area. Hey, I came back. That's what they do. They're so crafty. One moment. Hey, we got a tunic. That's cool. We adjusted things, so the idea is to make everything that comes out of a dungeon is either a useful building resource or it's something sellable. So that way there's incentive for the player. That's making me realize I need to add the Diverger lanterns too. Add Diverger lanterns to sellables. And aside from that, most of this stuff is sellable. All this is not the food, but everything else. Yeah, most of the loot is sellable. And we started just with like a basic idea with the traders of using the existing Diverger, the NPC talk field. And then it was supposed to just be like an easy way to test it, right? And with the idea of having specific traders. But it ended up being something that was... It was like really cool, if that makes sense. And again, like so many things on Palm, they're not purposeful. They're like things we just tweaked or adjusted that ended up being fun, you know? Ah, okay, I understand now. So Ash says you can create a big dungeon with more rooms. Need to check fields. Must discuss in Valheim world editing. Hey, yeah, so I see what you mean. You're saying that instead of just making all of the dungeons basically really big, you make one specific dungeon and you add another entry for that for it to get generated somewhere. But so what I was talking about though is I want to see what happens when the dungeons themselves are big enough to clip into each other at the edges. Because in theory, if that happens, most of the time it's just going to block off part of the dungeon. Basically, the player won't perceive it or they'll see something weird. But in theory, sometimes through the randomness and the fact that they reset, they're going to clip into each other in a way where the player like can do something. Although I don't know if that's even possible, is it? Because they're sort of like self-contained spheres. So if they, yeah, if they go into each other, to get into one, the player would have to get out of the other, right? So I guess that would never actually happen, which is probably your point. Let's see. Do I think I'll grab a cart. I like the process of putting carts on both ends. That way I don't have to keep like going in and out as frequently. And we should have, yeah, we have 200 coins here. And we also have that diverger. Yeah, you can sell the you can sell things to the diverger that you find in the tombs. And sometimes that's a good way to do it in the beginning. That way you don't have to keep spending 999 coins, right? So I could sell this diverger, the things that I find in the dungeon, as long as they're full stacks and eligible items that she buys. Yoo-hoo! Alright, there's our cart. Let's, I used to try wheeling it around, but I find that actually just wastes time. It's better to just put it in the beginning. And then you sort of just have an easy place that you can store things and do all of that. Helps with the looting process, because when I've been doing these deeper dungeons, what I've found is they're definitely really fun to explore, right? But then sometimes you find yourself in situations, right, where you have to keep going back over and over and over again to the places to actually get the loot out of them. And that was a pain. So that's why, like, I adjusted certain mechanics, like the cart itself, to have more storage space. And the cart outside has like 3 times the amount of storage space, right? And that cart is reused because I don't lose it each time. So the idea is to make a system that makes it enjoyable to loot the dungeon. And that's another part of the playtesting. It's not just like seeing what happens. It's like testing the melee, the tower shield buff, all this different stuff. And it looks like this is yet that accidental feature where the bubble block breaking stuns the enemies, and it makes blocking really powerful, because you basically get an AoE stagger, which is crazy, right? And then, as you can see, there's other stuff that happens with the basic spawns. The way that we adjust the dungeons so far is pretty simple. It's not anything crazy. Like, they're just bigger. The minimum and maximum rooms and the min required rooms are all bigger, larger numbers, right? But aside from that, it's all just swapping prefabs. And like, not just that, but on Palm, like in vanilla, like, why would you give a player a black core? It doesn't make sense, really. But on Palm, all of the cores are money. So when you have a stack of Surtling cores, that is 300 coins. And also, the more you process metals on Path of Magic, your kilns and things break. They get destroyed, and you don't get the resources when that happens. The Path of Magic attrits the player as they process things. And this is tricky to balance, because if you do it too much, it's really frustrating for players. But at the same time, a well-balanced attrition system makes the world itself a more effective item sink, and when done properly, that gives the player more long-term depth in the world. So it's important, even though it's hard to balance. A lot of like important mechanics, I would say, function that way. They're things that maybe on paper don't sound good, or maybe people are like, no, they don't like that idea. But then if you balance it right, it works. It serves some purpose. That's usually the process. Like, almost every mechanic serves a purpose. It's just a matter of figuring out how often can that mechanic happen. Because even if the mechanic itself, even if the mechanic itself is very abrasive, as long as it's incredibly occasional, it won't really matter that much. Like if there's something that happens like once a month to a player when there's 10 people playing, you know, it doesn't really matter that much. But if that same thing happens every single time the player logs in, that is a huge problem. So at the end of the day, it's not really about the mechanic. It's about the recurrence of the mechanic. That's the individual variable that really determines if it's balanced or not balanced. You can have a really overpowered mechanic. As long as that mechanic isn't happening in a way that makes the game easy, you know, then it works out. Hey, we got wood. And that's another, yeah, as you see, there's those boxes. They're called builders boxes. And as enemies die, they run these loot tables, pretty much. They're not actual tables because I didn't use that mechanism. So they just like have a wait and a chance pretty much to spawn an item. And it could be a normal item or it could be something like that. Builder's box. There's like, I think there's 32 different builder's boxes. And the more common ones are like the one you just saw, wood or stone or whatever. But again, the idea is that like players should be able to have multiple ways of doing things. And I really have so far enjoyed this notion of being able to dungeon crawl to acquire resources and then build with them, because in theory it'll make bases that are built out of materials based on the dungeon they're next to. And it's a really interesting loop, I would say. Now, I think this is this whole dungeon. Oh, maybe Ash, if you're still listening, do you know, like, what happens if here, one second. So, let's say that this is the file, the expand world dungeon file, right? Or expand dungeons file. And like, what's the limit to this stuff? Like, what happens, let's say I did like something like, you know, like something ridiculous. What would happen if I did something like that? I know that would be absurd. It would cause problems, right? Because like that would be fine maybe if there's one of them, but there's like, you know, loads of these dungeons, right? So have you, like, could you explain to me or share a bit? Maybe you could do that in the Discord about like what happens if you make these numbers too big? Because I'm not playtesting this. I'm playtesting this, which is already, I think it's tripled. I tripled it and then it was fine. And I really liked it. So then I tripled it again for this playtest, and that's what I'm doing now. So it looks like I've actually cleared this dungeon though. So one second here. So now I'm just gonna take the resources out, and what you'll find is that you get enough materials from the dungeon to reset the dungeon. Makes sense? So let's put our stuff here. Each dungeon reset costs 999 coins. And typically, on Palm, you'll get that through the Surtling cores, because each stack of 10 Surtling cores is worth 300 coins. So the Surtling themselves end up being one of the main ways that you're able to respawn the dungeon. And this is the loop I've been playtesting this a bit, so I feel pretty good about how it feels, to be honest. That's why I'm trying to find like what are the limitations of the dungeon depth, because I have a feeling that the Valheim experience like maybe I can make it more interesting on Palm if there's less dungeons, but the dungeons are deeper more often. Because like this, I love this experience of redoing the dungeon over and over again. And I know that the mentality, is to force players to explore. But I don't think that actually works. Like, I get it. Don't get me wrong. I get it that, like, oh, you got to find new dungeons and leave the place. But I think in practice, it's more effective if we make a gameplay loop where the player dungeons and builds and dungeons and builds, and they don't need to leave unless they want to. Because exploration, when forced to do so, is fundamentally more abrasive and irritating than exploration when the player organically feels curious. Without that curiosity, the player's ability to get immersed is limited. It's complicated. So that's something we've been trying to figure out. So Pan says, what is the difference between redoing one dungeon from redoing 2 different dungeons? I don't fully, could you elaborate or rephrase the question maybe? I don't fully understand what you mean. One dungeon, do you mean like redoing one dungeon type? Like the burial chamber versus the sunken crypt? Or do you mean having multiple dungeons? Or were you responding to me saying that having less dungeons but deeper? No, yeah, I didn't elaborate why. So the other reason for that is because Valheim suffers from like the multiplayer lag situation, right? And in general, anything we can do to help that is good. And one of the things that happens, and I've seen, is like even if you have an FAQ and you inform players how to do things and what mods to install to alleviate these problems, they don't do that until they encounter the problem, and then they do it. If that makes sense, it becomes part of the newbie experience on a Valheim server. Like at first they join and they think they can just join without having any kind of networking or quality of life stuff. And like, yeah, unfortunately, Valheim multiplayer for servers just isn't that good, right? Like you really do have to use networking mods. And like earlier, for example, I had forgotten to turn my VPN on, right? So like when another player came by, I was like trying to fight this Grey Dwarf brute, and it was like just zigzagging off over there as if there was terrain to walk on, and like doing all this crazy nonsense. And like it's like you have to actively like play with awareness of this stuff. And like new players, even if you make guides for them and explanations, they still will encounter that first and then react to it, if that makes sense. Yeah, and so let me try and elaborate on what you first asked, because you asked what's the difference between redoing 2 different. I don't think I understand the question fully, to be honest. Like, what do you mean by redoing the 2 different types? Oh, do you mean like from the player's perspective? Like going to the dungeon and then finding another one of that type? Because pretty much the idea here is I have this feeling that the way it normally works is players are encouraged to find, let's see, if I'm going to rant a little bit, I may as well make a cool view here. The way it works in normal Valheim is that players are incentivized to explore through a lot of different mechanisms. One of those is the reality that the dungeons they find and things they find are, let's say, they're finite. They run out. They expire, right? I'd say the most common experience with this on a server is maybe trying to find silver on a vanilla Valheim server that's already been played on. It also happens with like copper and tin and these things, but that tends to be easier to find. You can just expand and find new black forest. Whereas finding the mountains that are big enough to have silver can be challenging in the first place. But when you're playing on a server with that already happening, it accumulates, right? So there's all these forces going on that are encouraging players and also influencing them to think about Valheim in a certain way. And part of this consequence of this is that the people who play Valheim get this notion that a shallow biome, not always, but most of the time, isn't useful. Compared to a really deep, like how do you feel about finding a really deep, expansive swamp or a really deep, expansive black forest versus finding something that you think is really deep, but it turns out there's no caves, there's no dungeons, there's nothing there. Like, at least for me, when I played before, that was a recurring experience for me, was exploring, but then getting into a situation where that wasn't really viable anymore. It didn't like, I would often explore and find things that didn't matter, right? So it made exploring feel mundane. You know what I mean? And that's problematic, right? So I'm thinking that if we can make it so just one dungeon is such a useful, replenishable source of building supplies, then I think that can create a loop where the players feel more free to build in different locations because they know, again, this is a no map, no portal world, right? So it's more advantageous if you can create and acquire the building materials where you are instead of having to move around your entire base all the time. Even though there are mechanisms to do that with the quest boats and these other things. But that's the idea, and why I feel interested in expanding the dungeons and also finding ways to make them genuinely feel more useful. And at the moment, like, I think the only way to really do that in the long run is through encouraging builders, you know? Because building ultimately, like, building stuff, it's complicated because the combat and things, it sort of relies on, it's easier to satisfy, if that makes sense. I find it easier to supply people with interesting combat experiences than make a world where building is really fun, you know? But so I lean more into like thinking about the builder's perspective, if that makes sense. But that's probably because I started more combat focused and I like games like Dark Souls and these things. It's hard to tell sometimes. So let's see. Pan says, exploring useless places makes other places more valuable. Useless places can be aesthetic. Yeah, that's a concept called negative space. And it's also true in art and all sorts of things. Like, you need empty space in order to make an interesting space interesting. Yes, I totally agree. But look at this. Look at all these trees. Look at this river. Where's the dungeon in the river? Where's the dungeon in the bridge? Where's the dungeon in the black forest surrounding the dungeon? Isn't that empty space? I mean, and that's how I look at it. And in that sense, like, I get the logic. It sounds logical, don't get me wrong. You need boring dungeons to make interesting dungeons. But I don't think that's true. It's all relative. There will be bigger dungeons. By making everything bigger, that makes the smaller ones relatively smaller compared to the bigger dungeons. So it already happens. You don't actually need a dungeon that has, you know, like, okay, personally, I don't think there's any benefit to a blocked dungeon in the beginning. But that's negative space in that concept. You see what I'm saying? So, like, I understand, because it does sound logical. But that's the problem. Like, game development, I find, or let me rephrase, not game dev, game design, rather. It's complicated, because if you listen to yourself too much, like with me, this is how it works. I have ideas and thoughts, but they often are not the actual thing that ends up becoming awesome. The thing that becomes awesome is some random thing that I did not expect, that I did not even imagine might happen, that occurs by mistake. That's the thing that becomes really cool. It's the thing that becomes a feature. And that thing isn't my idea. It's not something that I thought of logically. So I've just noticed this happen over and over and over and over again in Path of Magic. I may have a general feeling or a thought, or a player may, or whatever, but ultimately, we find cool mechanics by adjusting things and seeing what happens and observing how it feels and experiencing it. So anytime logic makes us be like, oh no, this won't work because of that, it's probably bullshit. Like, in all honesty, it's so easy to make things sound logical. One can phrase sentences in almost any way to make anything sound like a good idea. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a good idea. Irregardless, the only way to find out the truth is to actually experience the situation. You see what I'm saying? And that is very true, I think, in many things, but in game development in particular. And when you're doing like the EWP scripting and on Palm, yeah, it really is like yeah, it's a game dev thing, I guess, right? In my head, any kind of and any kind of I don't know why I thought I could block him. I forgot that he was a 2-star for some reason. But any kind of like server adjustments, basically. I guess that's an interesting point, because people don't necessarily think about it from a game dev perspective, do they? Like, oftentimes, actually, I'd say what's more common is that people just find something, yeah, and they're just like, I'm gonna change that. They do the thing I'm talking about. But they don't really think about, like, how it affects the player, right? But then they'll change it, and then they'll see how things affect the player. And that's ultimately how you learn. You learn by doing things and seeing the behavior, not so much by thinking about how it's gonna happen logically. Or maybe that's just me, but I find that my mind is a limiter. My mind is like this thing that stops things. So the more I use my mind, the more I stop and get in the way, which can be useful. You know, sometimes I need to suppress something. But it's the opposite of the perspective that your mind is the origin of things. I find that to be a very painful way to exist. For me personally, viewing the mind as a thing that causes issue, it takes issue about things and makes problems about things and makes logical assessments about things that sound really accurate. They sound so lovely, but then in practice, they often are maybe not relevant. I'm not saying they're wrong, but the world of logic is, it has little to do with humanity and our world. Our world is completely dominated by impulses and feelings and people being, let's say, problematic. Much more often than things are fair, interesting, kind, etc. Hey! Cool. Baliog was showing me this thing, basically. So you can make these loot tables for the actual chest. And for some reason I didn't think about doing that. But we can make the, like, empowered monsters. Right now they just give you a treasure chest, and it's alright. But it feels like it's kind of, I don't know, it could be more fun. So probably those chests will get reworked at some point so that they drop more interesting things. And the idea is that when you kill an empowered monster, you get a chest, and then that chest allows you, it like gives you an item that's related to a mechanic. That way when a new player finds one of them, they're then drawn into a mechanic in some way because they got that chest that enabled it. Or sorry, they got the chest, and then it gives them an item, and that item can have special data or something, right? So the item itself can describe the mechanic. As long as the server makes the item, not the player, I can add text to it. And so that can be a way that players who don't know Palm can learn about it. What I've been focusing on pretty much is, like, right now I have the benefit of, like, being involved with this community and being able to talk about things, and we share ideas and we do all this stuff. But I want Palm to be able to be a layer, like almost like an expansion pack. You just put it on your existing Valheim world, no matter what it looks like, whether you use portals or not. You can use your own world modifiers, etc, etc, etc. I want that to be possible, and for that to be possible, the players have to be able to learn about mechanics through nothing. Like, through not knowing anything, just loading it. Maybe they watched a video about how to install it after watching a teaser video or something. That's it. That's all they know. And they need to be able to play the game, and the game teach them what to do and how things work. And this mentality is new. Like, now when I develop things on Palm, I have that mentality. But before, it wasn't like that. It really was more of an experimental thing. More of something where I don't really know exactly what will happen. Whereas now, I still have a lot of stuff I haven't tried, features I haven't used, etc. And things that I can improve on. But for the most part, I'm much more comfortable scripting now. And I can, like, write scripts without, like, copy pasting as much. It's just in general easier for me. And so I can plan things out more. It's easier to think about mechanics and what's possible. So now I'm ready to sort of revisit things and make them more self-educating. I don't know how to describe that, but when I first made features, I relied on the player reading about the feature or knowing about it because somebody told them, or them watching a YouTube video, or you see what I mean? I relied on the player knowing. And I see that that can't work. I have to make it so, yeah, the player who wants to educate themselves can do it. That's fine. But most of the players won't be that person. And I in order to make Palm feel fun for a lot of people who use it, I have to be kind to them and make Palm warn them adequately, because otherwise it's like too abrasive for the masses, so to speak. And the layer, it's sort of like this. Like, there's the Palm server itself, which I love, no map, no portal forever, basically. But the layer is different because the layer needs to work regardless of the individual's preferences. So the layer needs to be able to work if they like portals, or if they like easy mode, or if they like passive, or if they like anything. Like, that's how I want it to be. Like, it won't require no map, no portal. The person can set up their own world and play the way they want to. But in order to do that effectively, as I mentioned, every mechanic that's really important has to educate the player about its existence in multiple ways. So that's something that I've been keeping in mind. And the player doesn't need to learn all of the mechanics. Like, it doesn't work that way. There's just a couple things in the beginning part of the experience that need to happen to lift the player out of this thinking that, oh, this is Valheim. I know Valheim's limitations. I haven't installed any mods. I know what to expect. Like, that part of the experience is what I'm targeting, because it's the most complicated part for me personally when I like try and design for players joining Path of Magic and think about what they expect and everything. I have to keep in mind that they, even if they've watched content, they're gonna do things based on the Valheim they're used to, based on what they normally do. And if I don't give them chances to learn that something is dangerous, then they learn by getting ganked by it. Maybe by losing their body or something, you know? And that isn't something I want to do. I want to be able to help people learn about the mechanic before it kills them. I think that that's a better way to design in general. It's not good to rely on death itself as the thing that teaches. Like, don't get me wrong, I love that part, but the death is only... okay, I can put it this way. The death is only useful if the player knows, oh, they're like, the moment before they die, they're like, oh, you know, and then they're like, I see now. I should have listened. I ignored blah, blah, blah. Then, when they die, it's informative in the long run. Maybe they get angry in the moment, but yeah, in the long run, informative. However, if the player just dies and then they get into a death loop or whatever, and they didn't have a chance to be told that this is different, I don't like that. That's not something I want to make happen. So it's all about thinking about these people and what their experience will be, etc., etc. And most of the mechanics, like, they don't need to be communicated, in all honesty. A lot of the stuff just is fine being not known as well. 1 second. Because it also serves as adding depth to the game. Because as players learn about new mechanics, it makes the world feel, it's almost like your character develops. Because you, as a player, understand more ways to add depth to the experience. So that's, if you're wondering why the Wraith was behaving that way, it's the bronze armor fears certain monsters, and then they start running away from you. So if you look in the chat, it says Labrat, or the Wraiths flee at the sight of Labrat's bronze armor set. So I probably will make that maybe more common. I don't know. The idea is to increase the practicality of things, right? For some reason I feel small in this dungeon. Nice. You know, I think at this point, we've probably gotten enough materials that I can do an empower or two. I don't have that much silver. I think I've gotten 3 silver, which is enough for one empower. At some point, I should go, like, find an actual silver node. That would probably be a better way to playtest the empowering system. And now, yeah, now the player, just by default, if they use a tower shield and they have the belt, they can hold 700 pounds of stuff. So it should make it easier, because like the player still has their inventory limit, of course, but that way, if they want to grab like a stack of metal, like they can do it. That's the idea. Like make it easier to handle the heavy stuff. Let's see. Is there? Yeah, I haven't done this part. Cool. That looks gnarly. Ooh. These places are cool, to be honest. I'm actually quite surprised. Like there's things I want to adjust, of course, but for the most part, I've really been enjoying doing the burial chambers. And it seems that, like, to be honest, like Iron Gate did a really I'm gonna die. Iron Gate did a really good job, I think, with the dungeons and the generation. The thing is that the players are temporarily incentivized to go through the dungeons, so they end up not feeling as fun. It's almost like the dungeons are well made, but they're not like presented properly, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like, have you ever built something in Valheim, but then you like realize that the most interesting part of the building is always in the darkness because of the sunlight and it wasn't facing the right direction or something? So you made something really beautiful, but because it's not very well lit, you know, it's hard to experience that. And then if you just light it properly, it looks awesome, you know? That's kind of how the dungeons in Valheim are. They're really, I like them a lot. And like, don't even get me started on the Frost Caves, because they're awesome. Like, genuinely, I loved the Frost Caves because there's so much, they feel so much genuinely deeper than the burial chambers and the sunken crypts, right? And I loved that. I really loved it. But I see now that, like, it's the fact that the incentives for the player are finite, they're temporary, they're things that are ending. And that reality causes the dungeons to not feel as interesting as they can be. The player doesn't tend to go through them as often as they could. And like, for example, if you have a respawning dungeon, you get to learn about all of the different passageways and hallways and things that you can find in a way that takes a lot longer normally. And probably a person just isn't going to experience that many dungeons because, like, they're just, once you have the Surtling cores, you have enough furnaces and smelters, it literally just accumulates. Like, that's the problem with these temporary kind of loot situations. They're not something that keeps the world going. You know what I'm saying? And that can cause a lot of problems in the long run. I think that was it, right? That was the whole dungeon? See, this one is pretty small, and they can still be small because, as far as I know, the dungeon itself is huge, but that doesn't mean that you get access to the entire thing. Make sense? So there's dungeon that gets generated, but then for whatever reason, the player can't reach, right? Because there wasn't a door spawned or whatever happens, the way it connects, you know? But sometimes I'm wrong and it actually is just something I missed. I think in this case, though, I can clearly hear that there's other monsters, but it's probably just that they're in the bigger part of the dungeon that isn't accessible by the player, I would assume. Unless I missed something obvious, though. I'm also keeping my eye out for situations where there's like specific objects that if you spawn and swap into the dungeon, they add like depth and they add interesting mechanical feel to the dungeon. And one of those things, for example, is like having metals in the dungeon. You know, that's quite simple, quite easy to do. That's how we ended up with having like tin. You know, we've gotten 20 tin and all this stuff. And this is all from dungeon splunking. So what I want to do real quick is toss the metals onto the conveyor and just load that stuff up here. And I think if I noticed earlier, if the acetylene cores pass by the conveyor foreman, I think he sells them. I'm not sure though. We'll see in a moment. Is that all the ore? Yeah, I think so. And hey, we got our copper node back. Can do the explosive mining. You know, I've been torn because right now the exploding arrows on Palm they're able to mine things really well. Which makes it's really fun, but it's also like very, very effective. And it makes me wonder, like, oh, maybe that's bad. Because I stopped the magic from doing that. Because I felt like it was too gimmicky, because a player could just use the fireball staff for everything. And then it, like, takes away depth from other things. I'm not sure, though. I guess we'll have to find out. Alright, so I'm just going to load this. Yeah, it looks like it doesn't get sold if it passes by him. That's cool. Alright. So that stuff's still gonna go, get loaded up. May as well replenish these. Always good to replenish this kind of stuff. Awesome. And now I'm just gonna run to the base real quick. I need some more food. And by the time we get back, that should... Yeah, I'm testing out a new thing here. I think you could make it so it looks like it falls into the cart. You just have to place it in the right spot. I haven't done that yet, though. Alright, we're gonna roll in the health food. Let's take some sausage. It's funny, I never did this before. I was always a stamina food or magic food eater for the most part. But now I'm trying to I'm gonna wear this bronze armor. Just keep going. till I can find it enjoyable and interesting. And so far, I will say that the extra carry weight from the armor set, it feels more intuitive than I expected. So that has worked out quite well. And I think I know what I'll do. I will also make some explosive arrows. Let's do that real quick. Bum 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 bum. Let's see, Pan says, yesterday I did 2 frost caves, then went into the Verger tunnel for a bigger mountain, set up outpost, and went looking for more. That's cool. I'm glad you've been having fun with the frost caves. They are really cool, man. Like, Iron Gate did it. I love the frost caves visually. The music, the way, like, each frost cave has that part that you break when you enter it. That, like, they very clearly learned lessons from their earlier dungeons and made more interesting dungeons. Definitely. And I'm kind of wondering, like, maybe that's the attitude, and maybe the Ashlands is sort of like the warfare negative space place, and then Deep North will have like some kind of dungeon that they are more into, because they know that, like, it's interesting, isn't it, that like the Ashlands doesn't really have dungeons for the most part. It has the Morgan caves, but that's not, they don't really vary that much, and there's also not a whole lot of reason for the player to like look for them, right? But then you get the frost caves, and the frost caves and the infested mines are really, really, really cool. I think they're like, these dungeons serve as a good simpler version, and then you get the depth of those deeper dungeons. So it's kind of confusing that that isn't in the Ashlands, but then if it is then in the Deep North, it's less confusing, because that adds some variability, and they like not just copy pasting stuff into each biome. You know what I'm saying? So I wouldn't be surprised if they have something like that. But I don't know, because mountain frost caves are a thing. So what would they, maybe they'll make like some kind of cavern, or I don't know, they'll call it something else, you know? I guess we'll find out. Honestly, ever since I started working on Palm, I've been way more patient with like updates and these things because it's like, yeah, I feel like I have things to focus on and work on. So I don't mind like if Gate takes their time because I don't need them to like change everything. I don't need to wait for them to change stuff to try and change things, you know what I mean? I'm not sure what's going on here. This is acting funky. Is this like a double spawned copper node or something? Like it exploded. Maybe it's because I have... No, I don't even have the conveyor on anymore. That's bizarre. What's going on here? Can I hit it normally? Huh. Seems to be invincible. Curious. I'm assuming this is just some kind of weird... What's going on here? Is there like an invincible edge? Is that what's going on? There's 2 of them and 1 is invincible. Interesting. That is kind of odd, isn't it? Because you can basically get some materials by damaging it, but then you can't actually clip into it. Bizarre experience. So I think that happens when the game or the server tries to put data onto something, but it doesn't. Something goes wrong, basically. And then instead of getting the thing... Ooh, I missed the block. Basically, something goes wrong in the moment the data tries to apply itself, and then instead of the data getting applied, it just duplicates the object. And sometimes it then has the corrupted data. Sorry, the new object is like vanilla and doesn't have any data, or it's got corrupted data or something. So all sorts of weird stuff starts happening. I'm getting... I could probably fill up this whole chest with Queen's Jam just from dying. I've been using this gamma mod to make it more it makes it so the night is like, you can tell it's night, but it's not just dark. You know? It's kind of interesting. I've seen the other players use it, but I didn't feel like personally incentivized to use it until recently. Mostly because there's not much point in me streaming like really dark content. Just in general. So that's like the whole reason, basically. I'm just gonna turn this back on for a little. See how these are doing. It looks like everything's smelted that's over there. Nothing's on anymore. I guess I can take advantage of this. There's probably some ore somewhere. Let's see. Scrap iron, nothing else. Okay. Then let's see, what's going on here? Is this also invincible? No, that one's not. Interesting. So it's gonna be more laggy because I have the conveyor running. So it might not even notice the fire. Oh no, I'm shooting silver arrows, that's why. Let's see. Yeah, it happened, but a little bit later, right? And something's weird about like the way it isn't damaging the copper node. Maybe the damage is like too high up or something. Or it could just be that because the conveyor is running, it's getting, let's say, confused. So let's see, we'll turn this off. And now let's see. No, it still does that. I wonder what that's about. Yeah, because this is a normal copper node, right? I have a feeling it's based on where the damage is placed. So let's mine, like, into the node a little bit. There we go. And now let's see if we can explode it, right? I mean, if that's how it works, that's kind of interesting. Nah, it just doesn't do it. Very bizarre. And then what about the ooze bombs? I don't think I patched that though. Did I adjust that and forget? Let's see. So I'll make the ooze bombs also do an explosion. So let's make one of those and see. Because it should be getting damaged. I don't know why it's not, in all honesty. It doesn't really make sense to me. But let's see if the ooze bombs do anything. Yeah, they do damage. Did I patch the fire arrows to not do? I don't think I did that though. I swear, before you could just shoot the thing and it would do damage to it, but now it literally doesn't do it. So maybe I patched it and forgot about it, but the ooze bombs still do it, so I'll just do it this way. These were like made for mining, so they do damage like down into the ground a little bit. So you can toss them like that to more quickly mine a node. And I took that away from the magic. The magic used to work that way as well. But magic, it's like, because it just replenishes, I'm thinking I'll tie that kind of action of like mining with explosives or mining in a way that's much faster. I'll tie it to items. So like you can do it, but like in this case, you have to use the ooze bombs. Or maybe even you have to use the fire arrows. Because that way you still have to make something. And the more you shoot it and that kind of thing, the more that happens, right? Oof. Alright, I don't want to do that too much. I'm not going to do this too much. I just want to see how this works a bit. And I don't fully understand why it doesn't clear them in those situations. But I'm assuming that it's just... yeah, it's just where the damage is placed, probably. Like, it's too far up or it's too far down. Something like that. But for now, let's turn this back on. And because people have mentioned, like, not... that people dislike bronze. And personally, one of my favorite early game experiences was making bronze and doing that. And like, I remember I played on a server and everyone was building in the meadows and I made a Black Forest base and it was so crazy because the trolls kept trying to kill me and I loved it. And people thought I was crazy, but I had fun. And then like for me, getting the bronze is fun. I like bronze. The mining part, not so much. But the problem's more that bronze itself, it like has some nice building uses, right? But the armor in these things for the player, they're just like not, they don't last very long, you know? And even from like an exploratory perspective, in general, like one's better running through the swamp quickly and getting a few things and coming back than one is like slowly in armor trudging through it and getting ganked by monsters, you know? So the bronze armor is presented in a way that keeps it from feeling fun. And I think that's one of the reasons people dislike it. So that's my theory basically. It's twofold. One, bronze armor itself just is not very rewarding. But 2, the act of mining bronze with a pickaxe is frustrating for people. And that combined with the fact that bronze is a more complicated resource to acquire, just in general, right? Because all the other materials like silver, you know, silver and iron, you just get it and you smelt it. Black metal, you get it and you smelt it. Flame metal, you get it and you smelt it. Hey, okay, this is the previous ultra cart. It fell down here, I remember now. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whereas with copper, you know, it doesn't work that way. Or sorry, not with copper, with the bronze. With the bronze, you have to do effectively 3 times the stuff, right? Because you need 2 copper, 1 tin. Which is kind of interesting because they never do that again in any of the progression, right? So it makes bronze like, it sort of has that going against it. So if you want to make bronze like more practically useful, let's say, you have to keep in mind that it has to feel better than the other stuff because it takes a lot more effort to get. But that is complicated to balance with the fact that it is an early game resource that doesn't necessarily scale well and then becomes available through scrap bronze in the Mistlands, right? So, as usual, it's not simple. There's like nuance to it, right? A lot of things with server development seem to be like that. It's like if you... Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at earlier. Like, it's really good to get out of your... the part of you that plans everything out perfectly. And it's better to like make a simple modular thing that you can experience or other people can experience and then repeat that experience over and over again so that you can do something else and observe what happens and then adjust it, right? That's the idea. A tough soul of lab rat, huh? I see, I see. That's what got me earlier, huh? I guess he deserves a silver arrow. No, I missed. Alright, I think this is ready to reset, right? This one was pretty small, that's right. So I'll do one more, and we'll see how it goes. Our cart is a safe distance away. Make sure that when you reset the dungeon, there's nothing you care about. Because if you have like a tombstone or a cart, it's just gonna get yeeted into oblivion pretty much. So that's gonna be frustrating if you cared about what was in it, right? Yes, I have to remember the enemies. I always, whenever I reset it, I forget that the enemies come back like clockwork. So then they proceed to just wreck me, right? It's funny. I need to restore my dagger. I want to empower it, like, definitely. I can feel the difference between the level 3 dagger and the level 6 one. So I can only imagine once you start getting like into the increasingly further levels of empowering, it must get even more intense. And I'm also happy because I love the Abyssal Razor. Like, I like how it looks, and yeah, I just like it. And now I can use it more and make it last longer into the rest of the game through empowering stuff. And like, I know people sometimes get lost in the logic of the empowering system, but that's not, the idea isn't that, like, I know some people are logical, they enjoy that part, but like, that's not necessarily why it exists. The idea with empowering is to give players a way to make their favorite weapons more viable. That's it. It's not necessarily like, they need to make the absolute best thing. Because they don't need to make the best thing. The empowered weapons are so strong that they can make do with something that's just very good or quite good. And then they get to use something that they care about. That's the idea. Oof. Although, of course, some players, that's what they care about. They care about things being the most powerful option. I definitely almost died there. Yikes. Well, this soul is living up to his name of being... of being a strong soul. Okay, so I need to score a hit on the Droger with an arrow. And then bring the Wraith closer. No, I missed. That didn't work at all. Killed him though. Uh-oh, how did that happen? Wait, how did they break out? I haven't done anything up there. I see, there must have been some Grey Dwarfs or something. Oof. That was gnarly. Hey, Mr. Locks, calm down, calm down. Okay, I guess this needs to be addressed. I won't do anything fancy, I'll just help with this. I see what happens. So he gets startled and then he starts running around. I don't blame you, buddy. I don't blame you. Life's startling. Certainly. Yeah, I got rid of the door, but maybe that'll be okay. It's probably because I'm in the dungeon, or I've been in this area, which keeps it active. And then that makes enemies, like, go to where they can kind of sense another enemy. They have to be pretty far away from them, otherwise that happens. And they'll, like, just, like, stare that spot down. It's pretty funny, actually. Alright, let's see what this burial chamber has to offer. I'll probably just leave those settings at the high amount until something happens. Like, until there's some kind of problem. Sweet. I guess this could count as warning. I've gotten used to the noises and stuff, but they're not normal, right? So players will hear them and then it's like, oh snap. That's like a good indication that something's going on, right? And the idea is that it's like, there's a lot of energy around you and it's building and it's like, you know, it's unstably creating these entities. At least that's the way I'm trying to make it feel. I shouldn't have killed the wolf. Should have let him deal with this spawner. Hey, a copper node. That seems to be spaced decently. So I know maybe they look weird like this, but I think it's kind of cool. I know the player won't be able to access the entire thing, but I think it ends up working out anyway. Well, let's see what happens to it now, because I was able to blow them up with the explosive arrows before. I remember I shot one and it blew it up in the other stream, and then that's what got me thinking about, like, how do I want to handle these explosive changes? And yeah, why does that work here? What? Why does it work about what? I don't know, whatever. I'm just gonna roll with it for now. That's funny. And so basically that just yeeted a bunch of copper ore probably out of the dungeon, and it's gonna fall onto the ground outside. Which is like not necessarily as expected, but yeah, honestly, not that bad. There's another feature I wanted to test in general with dungeons. Hey, don't mess with me, 2-star go. Oh! I thought that was a silver arrow for some reason. Hey, Mr. Ghost, Mr. Ghost, Mr. Ghost. I see. So they're not ridiculously powerful. Oh, my dagger broke. I gotta get it. Hey, the Surtling saved the day. Oh, brutal. I have like barely used. I just happened to have this spear because it dropped earlier. I need to kill something so I can heal. Okay, whereas there's the Surtling. That's the weakest enemy right here. Oof. Whoa. I gotta look at what makes the heal not happen sometimes. So you see what's happening? Basically, as long as you hold block and you manage your health, you can stay alive. Although poison and fire damage sort of mess with that a little bit. But that's the idea, that like when you see me die, it's not because melee doesn't work. It's because I'm not blocking effectively. I haven't learned to use the system right. And also I'm using a spear, which is like a one enemy at a time hallway weapon. Whereas in general, you want sweeping weapons that have the ability to hit multiple enemies at once. At least for dungeons, that definitely is. It's like the way to go, it seems. Although now I have this. My dagger broke, and it's making me wonder. Maybe it's time to do an empower attempt, and it'll be level 1 or level 2. Or do I get a stronger dagger? It all depends on how much silver has been processed. Let's see. So we have all of this stuff. I'm gonna go turn the conveyor on so it can bring whatever was processed out of the forges and into the base. Hello, Hilly. Welcome, welcome. Good morning. Well, good morning for me. Not sure what it is for you. I hope you're doing well. So I'm trying to empower some stuff, and I need some silver in order to do that. I only need like 2 silver though. So I think a lot of this stuff has already been smelted. Let's see. Just chuck it in this cart for now. Hey, look at that. We got 5 silver. That is enough for a solid 2 empowers. We might even get more of it coming. So I'm just going to toss the metal in here for now. Hey, 6 silver. Okay. Hey, we did pretty good, actually. Alright. I'm going to be good and grab a new hammer instead of creating more trash. Tools. Yeah, look at that. And now I'm going to make some empowering attempts for the Abyssal Razor here. So let's see. It looks like... I swear there... Wasn't there 6 silver? I swear there was 6 silver. Why does it think that there's 5? That's so confusing. For some reason, it doesn't see that silver. Ah, there we go. Now it does. That was weird. All right. So, this is the blacksmith. Fancy diverger, like I mentioned earlier. And you make the treasure chest, and then you throw the item that you want to risk. Boom. And what do we have? Any luck? Oh no, the conveyors are running, so that's gonna delay it a bunch. Oh, no luck. Oh, wait, no, it broke. Oh, that's tragic. How tragic. Let's try one more time. Except now I have to remake an Abyssal Razor, right? So let's go over here, make a new one. When I went to get the razor earlier, well, I'm sorry. When I went to get my body earlier, I got some shitting, and I wanted to get a more stronger one. But now you see the drawback of empowering. I wanted to get a level 12 one, but now I just have a level 3 one, and I still have to make a successful empower to then get the weapon I already had, right? So in general, if you just try and empower one weapon, it's a frustrating process. But if you accumulate a lot of resources to make like 10 empower attempts, and you have multiple weapons built, then it's a more enjoyable process. Make sense? So here, let's see. Any luck? It's a little bit laggy right now because the conveyors, so it takes a moment. And you don't want to pick it up, because if you pick it up, then basically it's going to get stolen from you. No luck. So I think we can try one more time, and then the end result is either going to be we just have one Abyssal Razor. Crashed. I gotta end the stream now. Have a good one. I appreciate your time, effort, and attention. And I'll see you next time in the Path of Magic. Thanks for watching another episode of the Path of Magic. All of the crazy nonsense that you've been seeing so far has been done with Expand World Prefab. Expand World Prefabs is a fantastic server-side BepInEx mod developed by Yair. And if it wasn't for Yair's hard work, none of this would be possible. So I strongly encourage you to support Yair if you can. And if you're interested in supporting my work, there's two ways that you can do so. By getting your own dedicated Valheim server at Zap Hosting. I've got lots of tutorials showing you how to set everything up, and it doesn't even take that long. All you'll need to do is go to the link in my description, zaphosting.com/jpvalheim. That'll get you set up with the BepInEx server straight away, and then you just need to change a couple config files, and I have all of the information that you need for that. The second way is to support me on Patreon, and you can just check out the link in the description below if you're interested in doing that. I understand that some of you might want to support me, but interested in doing that. I understand that some of you might want to support me, but you're not gonna get a server to do so. So here you go. Now you have a way to do it. Thanks for watching, and I'm gonna see you in the next episode of the Path of Magic. Bye-bye.